Welcome back to our 13th episode of Zag Talk. This week we'll be talking about our first and second round previews for undetermined matchups, as we do have a play-in game or a first four game going into our first game. A couple of quick other hits for Gonzaga news this week, and then we'll jump into it. For starters, All-Americans, we got 4 Zags make the list. Kispert on the first team, Timmy and Suggs on second team, and Ayayi walks away with an honorable mention for All-Americans as well. Since it's been largely debated on Twitter on the different breakdowns, we'll give you the history. This is the third team since 2000 with 3 All-Americans on one team, and is the only team since the 1948 Kentucky team with 3 guys on the first 2 teams. I'm going to kick it over to Carson to talk about a little bit of Ken Pom news, as we've been talking about that all season and where the Zags rank.
Yeah, and I'll throw in there too at the All-Americans. We've had a lot of specifically Michigan fans today on Twitter talking about, oh, well, those 2 other teams, they didn't win a national championship. Obviously, Illinois made it to the championship, and I think the 01-02 Duke team did. I don't know. That might be the 01 team, but they didn't have 3 guys on the top 2 teams, so that's what I'm using as my reasoning. But yeah, Ken Pom adjustments. This actually just came out right before we hopped on to record this episode, but he just mentioned that there was some inflation in his rankings somehow. Not sure how that works on his site, but we had just snuck up over the 38 line, again, the 38.05, and we are now back down to 36.62, I believe. So a little bit of a hit there in terms of, where we stand historically, but I mean, still a great season. And we're still, I think the next closest team is Michigan at 30.0 something. So them and Illinois are right at 30 and Baylor right below. So still the same big gap. Nothing happened in terms of the rankings, actual where every team stands, but just something to keep an eye on. And if you go in and look and wonder how Gonzaga dropped by almost 2 points, that's the reasoning. Other than that, Dylan, you want to touch on some of the recruiting updates really quick?
As we've heard most of this season, Hunter Salas and Chet Holmgren are pretty much locks at this point to go to GU next year. Hunter Salas did announce on March 26th he'll be making his commitment. He also got the last crystal ball and is now has all crystal balls pointing towards GU. And as we've mentioned before, Chet's basically said he's going to be announcing sometime soon. We could see them commit on the same day. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. And again, since it's been the case all season, but pretty much all crystal balls are pointing to GU for Chet as well. So locking up 2 top 10 guys for next year, really setting the stage for another great season. Alrighty, let's hop over to first round matchups.
So as you guys know, we got the winner of a play-in game between Appalachian State and Norfolk State. We'll just do a quick breakdown on those before going a little bit more in depth on the potential second round update. Starting off with Appalachian State. They finished 4th in the East Division of the Sun Belt Conference this year. And in their conference tournament, obviously went on a run to get into the tournament by knocking off the number 5 in the West, Arkansas Little Rock, number 1 in the West, Texas State, number 2 in the East, Coastal Carolina, and then the number 1 in the East, Georgia State, to win their tournament. So quite a bit of a run they've gone on here. Obviously not a great regular season, being the number 4 seed within their division of their conference. Just a team that's playing kind of at their peak right now to sneak into the tournament. They're not a great offensive team. They're 227th in adjusted offense in Ken Pom with a 47.7% effective field goal percentage, which is pretty rough. And then defensively, 205th in the country, and then they run at a super slow tempo, 310th in the country. So if we did see them, you could see kind of an interesting matchup between obviously a really fast-paced team like Gonzaga and a really slow team, one of the slowest teams in the country, although we tend to see with some of these slower teams that they struggle to control the pace against a team like Gonzaga more than some of the better teams. Other than that, they shoot 32.6% from 3, but they shoot 43.6% of their total shots from 3. So shooting one of their least efficient shots as one of their highest taken shots. So That's what you get with the 227th ranked offense in the country. They're going to have a really big, or we're going to have a really big advantage inside. As their tallest guy's 6'9", but he actually plays more on the wing. And then their one true big man on the roster is 6'8", 215. So take that for what it's worth. He's actually listed as a versatile big, so not even a true big guy. They actually had another kind of wing big who was 6'7", who left the team back in December. I'm not sure what the reasoning was there, but yeah. So I mean, look for Timmy to have a big game. I really they're going to have trouble inside, and maybe even Anton down low could have a really big game too. So Dylan, do you want to maybe touch on just some of the personnel there?
Yeah, so you already mentioned one of their better players. He only played 9 games this season, but Kendall Lewis is going to be out. Other than that, they lean on Justin Forrest, who's one of their wings, but he's only about 6'2", so not a big guy. He is averaging, he's averaging about 13 points a game. And then Adrian Delph is their other one, averaging about 13, more of a spot-up wing shooter, probably where a lot of their shots are going to come from those guys from the outside. That's pretty much it for double-digit scorers. There are other high usage guys, Michael Almanassi and Donovan Gregory, both wings as well. Donovan Gregory more of a driving guy, and Michael Almanassi more of a spot-up wing. You're going to hear the term spot-up wing quite a bit with this team, just because most of their team is wing players. They almost all are outside, and like Carson mentioned, really their biggest starter is also a wing outside shooter, so they're going to have a rough time guarding us inside. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some minutes from Ballo in this game. I think we'll probably see a good amount of bench minutes, period. Would love to see Anton gain some confidence going into this first game. Going to be huge for him to really step up and be a great sixth man. Do you think we'll see the same starting lineup we've seen most of the back half of the season with Ayayi, Suggs, Nemhard, Timmy, and Kispert? You think that's the lineup we're going to see going into this game?
Yeah, I kind of think that's where we're going moving forward. I mean, maybe if we came up against a really, really big team, we might have to start Watson, but I kind of feel like at the same time, we throw out our small ball lineup and you can't start 2 bigs against that, or, a bigger lineup, because how are you going to guard that defensively? So I think we're probably more likely to dictate another team's starting lineup than they are to dictate ours. So yeah, and I mean, especially with these first 2 matchups that we'll kind of go through here, but there's really not much height to match up with us. And maybe a good segue into Norfolk State too is just their lack of size as well. First to touch on them, I guess, they finished first in the MEAC North Division, number 2 overall, and they actually had their semifinal game canceled due to COVID, and then won their championship against the number 3 overall Morgan State. But yeah, I mean, their bigs, I'm looking through their roster right now. They have a 6'9" guy who's one of their main guys, high usage guys, who's a versatile big guy. But that's it, really. Other than that, they don't have anybody else over 6'6", and they only have 3 of those guys who are all spot-up wing shooters, or, guys who are slashing and coming off screens. So, I mean, Timmy gets in there. He's really good at drawing fouls, and it could get really ugly really quick. It's kind of the same story with Norfolk State in terms of their KenPom numbers. They're 204th offense and 219th defense, and they are a little bit faster at 221st in the country in terms of tempo, but still pretty slow, but slightly faster than Appalachian State. I don't know about you, Don. It kind of seems, I would expect that Norfolk State will probably be the slight favorite in this first 4 game. So that's kind of who I expect we're going to get. Some more just numbers on them to give you a little bit of a profile. They're a pretty poor inside shooting team. They only shoot 46.1% from inside the arc, which is pretty rough for, when you're that close to the basket. And then they're prone to fouling and giving up a lot of free throws. They have one of the worst, the 330th free throw attempted to field goal attempted ratio, which it's telling you how many free throws the other team is getting per field goal that they're attempting. So they're fouling a lot, which, a team like Gonzaga, they're going to make you pay from the free throw line. And a team like this, not a whole lot of depth, especially in the front court. That could get pretty ugly. Other notes on them, a good amount of their shots come from the mid-range and outside, while 45.5% of their opponent shots come from three, which is one of the worst in the tournament field. So they're giving up a lot of shots from three and a lot of open shots from three. And then Dylan, I'll let you go over the personnel as well.
And I think the giving up a lot of shots from three is not something you want to be doing with Gonzaga this year, because they have so many weapons to be able to shoot from the outside. From a personnel perspective, relatively well-rounded team in the fact that they have 8 guys that are playing 15 plus minutes a game. Devontae Carter is their leading rebounder and scorer at 15.5 and 5.5 respectively. 15.5 points per game and 5.5 rebounds per game. So they've got some good players from what they've played this season. I think we'll be seeing Norfolk State most likely, but like you said, there's a couple of advantages they have over Appalachian State, but both teams just rank so low in so many statistical categories. It's going to be your classic 1 versus 16. This will most likely not be the UMBC matchup dethroning of Virginia from a couple years ago.
Yeah, I'll probably agree with you there. And we don't have Brian on with us today to make a wild pick in terms of a 16 over a 1 with Mount St. Mary's in Michigan. But all right, let's move on to the second round, the round of 32. Potential matchups. I know we talked about this in our Selection Sunday rapid reaction show. But I think, Dylan, you were the one that you thought Missouri was going to move on from this. And I think Brian and I had Oklahoma. So maybe I'll run us through Oklahoma first, and then you want to take Missouri and kind of give, your 2 cents on what you think is going to give them the advantage there. All right, yeah. So Oklahoma, they're out of the Big 12. They were in the top 10 for a chunk of this season before finishing 1-5 in their last 6 games. They're really, really struggling. And a large part of this is due to their defense. Bart Torvik's rankings for adjusted offense and defense had them ranked 47th in the country for the whole entire year in terms of defense, but they were 84th over the last 30 days. So really, really struggling on the defensive end. And we'll touch on some of their key principles defensively here in a second. But they're currently 39th in KenPom, and he has them ranked 36th on offense and 53rd on defense. And they are kind of similar to the first 2 teams we talked about, where they're not a super high tempo team, which Missouri will be more of, as you'll hear Dylan talk about, but they're 222nd in tempo. And they do have some good wins this year before they kind of fell off later in the year. Obviously, if they're top 10, they had some good ones. They beat West Virginia twice. They beat Kansas, Texas, and Alabama. So when they were playing, at their peak, they were beating some really good teams. So I guess if you're looking for something to worry you about this Oklahoma team, it's that they've proven that they can beat these top teams. You're looking at a 2 seed, a 3 seed, another 2 seed. So 2 seeds and 2 3 seeds there. So in terms of their roster and what they're doing on offense, Austin Reeves is their leading scorer, rebounder, and assist man. He's averaging 17.7 points per game, 5.7 rebounds per game, and 4.7 assists per game. So he's kind of their do-everything guy. One thing that Jordan Sperber, he had tweeted out in terms of his, a note on each team in the bracket was that Austin Reeves loves his shot fake, and he uses it to draw 6 fouls per 40 minutes. So something to watch out for. I know Suggs earlier in the year had been prone to some foul trouble, and we've had Nembhard in some foul trouble too, which has been cleaned up a little, but he's really good at drawing fouls. Think of a Colby Ross type of guy who can really get your guards in foul trouble. So keep an eye on that. We'll have to be really disciplined on his shot fakes. And then they have Brady Manic, who, if you haven't seen him, he's got a bit of a Larry Bird look going on, but it's not great. He's got a mustache that does not rival Drew Timmy's. But he's a versatile 6'9", big man who likes to step out and shoot it as well. He shoots 36% from 3, and he will let it fly. He lets it go without a thought from out there. And then their other main scorer is Devion Harmon, who's a 6'1" guard, averaging 12.9 points per game.
Brief side note, Devion Harmon actually tested positive for COVID-19 earlier this week after recording. He will be out for the first 2 games of the NCAA tournament, so we will not have to face him in the event that Oklahoma beats Missouri on Saturday. All right, back to it.
And they've got some decent-sized guards that can match up with our size at guard. Obviously, we just mentioned Harmon, who's a little bit shorter, but Austin Reeves is 6'5", and they have some other 6'4", 6'5" guards. So, I mean, that's something that they could match up with us with. But again, in the front court, not really the size that can match up with Drew Timme. They have a 6'10" big man who plays 17 minutes a game. And otherwise it's Manic, who's, really not a traditional big in terms of, being able to body up in the post. For offense, this is what Oklahoma's offense is. It revolves around isolation and then attacking mismatches out of those isolations. Think of the last 5 or 6 years when they've had, Buddy Hield and Trae Young, and now it's kind of Austin Reeves who attacks out of those isolations and attacks those mismatches. Nearly 40% of their shots come from three, but they only shoot 33.8% from three. So we talked about in the Selection Sunday show how they can hurt you from three because they're shooting so many from three. So they get hot and that can hurt you, but really they struggle to shoot. They only have one guy on their team who shoots better than 38%. And that's, Dylan's butcher block here, Umoja Gibson. I don't know about the first name there.
Umoja, that's gotta be Umoja Gibson.
So he's their only guy who's shooting, at a super efficient clip from three. And I think the one thing to key in on offensively for them in this is that they do not turn the ball over often. They're one of the best teams in terms of turnover rate. Meanwhile, Gonzaga is one of the best teams in the country this year at turning teams over. So something to watch out for if we're able to turn them over. That's a huge advantage for us. That probably they're really going to have to keep it tight in terms of taking care of the ball to really have a chance in this game. And then really quickly defensively, they play a fairly traditional pack line man-to-man defense, which I know we talked about when we played Virginia earlier this year. But some key characteristics that are a little bit different with theirs were that they pressure the ball a little bit less than what you'll see in your traditional pack line. Normally pack line, whoever's on the ball is really trying to make them start that offense closer to half court. Oklahoma's really not doing that. They will hard hedge ball screens, but they also like to use some drop coverage, and they'll switch sometimes depending on the situation. So that's a little bit different than what you normally see in a pack line defense. If they're dropping on screen coverage with us, I think that's a recipe for disaster. We've seen, what our guards can do in those situations. So I would assume that they're going to hard hedge a lot of ours or maybe switch, but just keep an eye out for that. And then another thing with pack line defenses is you normally see the no baseline kind of rule, and they don't follow that. It doesn't seem, they are just kind of playing normal defense, but they are trying to send you to help and really clog up those driving lanes. And then the weird thing, I know I'm giving a lot of reasons on why this doesn't look like a normal pack line defense, but they do allow a lot more threes than the normal pack line defense does. If you think like Virginia and Louisville, although, Virginia gave up a lot of threes to Corey Kispert this year, but they're really not trying to take away those threes as much as the normal pack line defense. And they've done a decent job of in terms of, most pack line defenses, limit transition points. They're only giving up 9.7 per game, whereas GU averages 19 a game. So, that's kind of their deal. They're running a pack line thing. It's going to be tough to drive, but it's not the type of defense that Virginia and Louisville are, or at least at the caliber that you're used to seeing those. So I think we'll have an advantage inside with Drew Timme, and I think they will struggle to guard our guards a little bit, and just the movement overall. We saw what we did to a pack line defense earlier this year with Virginia, and the way we were able to attack that with some of those the off-ball motion and some of those off-ball cuts to open up those driving lanes. So I think that'll be a huge key for us in this game if it is Oklahoma who moves on.
So we'll dive into a little bit on Missouri's breakdown. This was my pick, although as we get into this season, or as we get into the tournament and as we get into more in-depth analyzing of some of these teams, I might be taking a more statistical look at some of these matchups, and maybe I'll switch over. I haven't decided yet. My main reason with going for Missouri, although they've gone 3 of 6 in their last 9 games, Oklahoma's gone 1-5 in their last 6 games. So both teams have not looked great of late. They both also have great wins, though. You mentioned the wins that Oklahoma has. Missouri's picked up wins against Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, and number 1 seed Illinois. So they also have shown that they're able to beat really good teams this season. I think this is a really phenomenal 8-9 matchup. I think this will be a good game between the two of them in the first round. They're a little bit different, 51st in KenPom with 51st offense and 58 defense. Like Carson, like you mentioned, a little bit faster tempo, but at about 160. But their offense has really struggled over the last month or so. Bart Torvik has them 64th in offensive efficiency in the last 30 days relative to their 33rd ranking for most of the year. They're led by their 2 guards, Drew Smith and Xavier Pinson, lead the team in scoring with 14.1 points per game. And they actually have a really good matchup for Timmy. 6'10" center Jeremiah Tillman. He's a super efficient force inside, led the SEC in efficient field goal, which leads to a great matchup with Timmy. He's great in ball screen rolls. He's averaging 12 and 7. I think that's going to be a really key matchup for them. If he's able to shut down Timmy, that's going to be huge for them. If he's able to attack Timmy, that's also going to be huge for them. If he's able to be efficient, if he's able to draw fouls, we're going to have to bring in somebody, either go smaller and bring in Watson, or go a lot less efficient and bring in somebody like Ballo. I'm assuming most teams are going to try to get our big men into foul trouble. I think that's going to be the way you're going to be able to exploit a Gonzaga team that's built the way our team is built. The negatives on the Missouri side is that Gonzaga should really be able to force turnovers. They turned over on 18.9% of their possessions. That is absolutely terrible. I did not know that. That is probably the number 1 driving factor behind the fact that I might be switching my pick at the end of this podcast. They also though have been really efficient around the rim, finishing about 58% of their field goal attempts at the rim. And that's just a really big number going up against Gonzaga. If you can be efficient at the rim and you're also able to drop it in from 3, that's going to be the key to beating a team like Gonzaga. The downside is they are not dropping it in from 3. They're quite struggling from 3, shooting only about 32%. Main guy to look for to shoot, if he is to get hot, is going to be Mark Smith, number 13. But even he's only shooting about 30%. They take a decent amount. Pinson shoots 5, Drew shoots 4.5, and Mark shoots almost 5 3-pointers a game. It's just a not very efficient 3-point shooting team. They score about 15 points more per game in transition. In terms of tempo and transition scoring, Missouri is going to be the team that's going to push the ball more. And they're also going to try to get the ball inside to Tillman if they do slow it down. His off-ball and weak side screens and cuts help to really keep them moving. And he's not really looking to score off of this, more utilize pick and rolls and spread the defense out, get downhill and attack. The other knock, and I think a knock on every team when you get to March Madness, is not a great free throw shooting team, only shooting 68% from the free throw line. So that's the thing. If your goal is going to be to take Gonzaga to the rack, to get Timmy or Watson in foul trouble and make us bring some of our bench out and go a little bit smaller, you also have to capitalize on the ability to get to the free throw line. That's something they're just not great at. For them, a little bit less to dive in defensively. They pretty much play a basic man-to-man. Their help defense is not great, and they sometimes look non-existent, which against a Gonzaga team is not going to fare well for them. They only contest 44% of their opponents' catch and shoot attempts, which puts them in the 16th percentile nationwide for that statistic. And they really are a recipe for disaster against GU unless they can get them into foul trouble. They have a solid big offensively in Tillman. He struggles on the defensive end, and that's going to be yet another advantage for the Zags if Timmy can take advantage of him. So I do think I'm as I'm thinking about this matchup and looking statistically, I still like Missouri as the winner in this matchup versus Oklahoma, but I don't think that they will be the ones to knock off Gonzaga. Either one will be the one to knock off Gonzaga. Obviously, I do think if Oklahoma manages to win that game, they're probably the team that would potentially fare better against a team like Gonzaga, because they do turn the ball over less, because they do have a little bit better of an outside shooting attack. I think Oklahoma's got a chance. I think they both have a chance, right? It's March, but still picking Missouri to win, but Oklahoma's probably the better matchup against a team like Gonzaga.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I was going back and watching kind of an abbreviated version of the Missouri versus Alabama game where they were up by 20 plus for most of that game and then almost threw it away. But just trying to see, how they were playing when they were playing at their peak. And they really do. Alabama, we know, is a really high tempo team. And I'm really surprised when I was looking at this. I know 116th in the country. That's a pretty good tempo-wise. I think they're getting around 71 possessions per game, whereas Gonzaga is at around 76. So when it comes down to it, it's not a huge difference. But I was surprised they were that far because when they play Alabama, I mean, they looked like the team almost that was getting out and really wanted to run. And that kind of seems like where they thrive. Their guards really like to get out in space and break down guys, even in the half court off those pick and rolls. And, kind of like you were saying with Tillman inside, they really do try to seek him out when the offense slows down. And a lot of their action is moving weak side, but they're not. I think that's kind of the knock on them is that a lot of their movement doesn't have any sort of purpose to it. They clear stuff out to get it inside to Tillman. And then that's kind of like, they're not really cutting with a purpose like you might see Gonzaga do or other teams that are effectively cutting. So yeah, I mean, I think when it comes down to it, the reason why I think Oklahoma is probably a tougher matchup for us is more on the defensive side of things, and that defense can just kind of clog stuff up. And if we were to have a poor shooting day, and also the fact that with that defense, you can really shut down transition points and not allow it as much. And I think if we're playing Missouri and that gets into an up and down game, they're not going to, be able to keep up with us like we've seen pretty much every game this year. I was actually going through when I was doing some of this and doing some research just on Gonzaga's numbers and found out it's pretty crazy. We're shooting between Corey Kispert, Drew Timme, Jalen Suggs, Joel Ayayi, and Andrew Nembhard combined. It's 72% at the rim this year shooting, which is just nuts. Like those guys, and I think if you threw Anton Watson in there, he didn't show up on this report. Just I think usage numbers. This report only gave the top usage guys, but I mean you have Andrew Nembhard he shoots the fewest out of everybody there in terms of attempts, but 69% from the rim or at the rim. Joel Ayayi 73% at the rim. Jalen Suggs 63% at the rim. And then Drew Timme, 73%, and Corey Kispert, 80%. So we've talked about it all year and how efficient this team is. But when you see some of these numbers, they really just pop out to you on how efficient we are compared to some of these other teams. When you really start looking and comparing, you're like, 60% or like 58% seems pretty good at the rim. And then you see, but we're shooting 72%. I think the second round matchup, it could be interesting. It could be close. Both those teams have played at their peak. They've beaten some really good teams this year. Just unfortunately for them, they're not playing at their peak right now. So yeah, we'll look forward to hopefully, moving on through those, getting some experience for some young guys on the team and just getting in our rhythm out in Indianapolis, and then moving on hopefully to another second weekend, the 6th in a row for this team. So I don't know, Dylan, any other thoughts for you?
No, that wasn't really anything. The only other couple things I'll mention just as I was thinking about names, Jeremiah Tillman rang a huge bell in my head. Could not think of from where. Googled it, and he's gone to Missouri his whole time. I thought maybe he was a transfer kid. I forgot he's one of the remnants of all those dudes that decommitted from Illinois 3 years ago. So it's interesting to see Illinois where they're at now. I wonder if Tillman's potentially regretting his decision, maybe a little bit. You throw him onto that team with Coburn, that's a phenomenal inside offense team. And I think Kofi probably balances him out a little bit better on the defensive end. So interesting little factoid. He was originally committed to Illinois 3 years ago, decommitted, joined Missouri, and has been there ever since. But both teams have their guy. Tillman's probably the guy in with Missouri, and Reeves is probably the guy in Oklahoma. So that's my only other takeaway.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say I thought you were going to say you thought it was Xavier Tillman from up at Michigan State. That's who I was thinking at first. I was like, was this a guy that transferred? And then I was like, no, it's not him.
Yeah. No, I think we're going to see that throughout the tournament. Everybody's got a guy or two that really stands out on their team, and we're not going to get into the All-Americans until later rounds. But, exciting to see a couple of cool matchups between Tillman and Timmy, and then Reeves and our guards in general. It'll be some exciting matchups either way.
Yeah, and I think it'll be good for us if we do see, either team really, but if we see Oklahoma in the round of 32, just having, once again, we talked about it with Virginia and, Iowa's style of play on offense and West Virginia's type of defense, just seeing a variety and kind of getting back on our toes and seeing something different, I think will help us out, even if we don't see that exact defense. But we could see Virginia in the Sweet 16 the next game. So if we're seeing Oklahoma in a pack line type defense, that's almost a perfect scout if you're talking about just running offense at a high level against that type of defense. So something to keep an eye on. Obviously, I guess some updates on the rest of our bracket as we talk about Virginia, that, Tony Bennett said this week that they are not going to be able to practice until Thursday this week as a team. Because they can do individual workouts in Skype sessions and everything, but because of protocols, they can't practice until Thursday, which is 2 days before their game, 1 day before their game. So I'm not sure if they're playing Friday or Saturday. But yeah, that's something that can really affect a team. And you've heard Mark Few say it, you saw it with Baylor, and just like those first practices back and those first few days back are pretty ugly in terms of the quality of basketball. So, and a team that wasn't playing great basketball going into the tournament, you never know. That could be upset central there. And same with Kansas. Now we know that McCormick has not traveled there, and so Jalen Wilson has also not traveled there. So that's two of their starters, and I think Brian had said that was 33% of their points are gone. And we know Jalen Wilson won't be available for the first game. I haven't heard that from McCormick, but I'm assuming if he's not there, that he probably can't play. But you never know, since he was quarantining during the Big 12 tournament, that maybe he will be ready before. But yeah, our bracket could look really ugly by the end of this weekend. But you know what? People will tell us that we're not going to play anybody, or that all the good teams were out or had this or that, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day. So,
and the other part of it is we already smacked some of these teams too. That's the thing, is to throw out the argument that you didn't have to play Kansas because they had COVID, whatever. It's no, we played Kansas. And I made the argument during our last episode. Kansas, if they're fully healthy, is a really scary team. I don't want to play them again, but I don't think they're going to be healthy. I do think Eastern has some upset potential in the first round of them. Even if not, they're going to play a much better team. Ooh, I don't know who they would potentially play after that.
They play USC if they win. I don't remember who USC is playing.
I think USC has a play-in game. So I don't remember which one.
That's right. They're playing the winner of Drake and Wichita State.
Yeah, and
Drake is getting back their best player. So we saw Drake was undefeated for a lot of seasons, so that could be a good game. But yeah, it's USC could give Kansas healthy fits. Although I forgot who it was. It might have been our buddy Evan Miyakawa, who was talking about teams that play worse against worse competition, and USC was one of the top teams there. So you could look at them and say, they could be an Elite Eight team if they're playing really well, and they have probably the number 2 or number 3 pick in the draft in Evan Mobley, and a guy who can match up with Luka Garza. He could dominate against Kansas inside, but they could also lose to a play-in team, and that I don't think would shock a bunch of people either. So it's going to be a mess. There's times I look at the bracket this year and think it should be chalk. And I thought that for a lot of this year, that it just seemed like the good teams were way better than the others. And now the way that it's played out, and just the way certain teams are playing and not playing, I guess, to their full potential, that we could see things get really ugly and really weird. As odd as that seems with how good Gonzaga and Baylor and Michigan at times this year, now Illinois have been, it could get crazy.
Yeah, and I think the Drake thing is a really good call out. I'd love to see them beat Wichita State. In fact, I think they should beat Wichita State in their play-in game going up against a team like USC. I think that could be really interesting as well. And the other part of it is if they're able to sneak past USC, if Eastern does upset Kansas just due to the fact that Kansas is going to be missing a lot of guys, that's going to be another really interesting matchup. Who would have thought that Eastern Washington and Drake would be playing each other in the second round? That's quite the matchup. And I think that on the other hand, Kansas is able to limp through this first weekend, able to eke out wins. They could also be really dangerous to turn it on the second weekend. I think that's the scariest thing about a team like that is if they're able to get everybody to Indy, if they're able to make it through the first weekend, they could be a really dangerous team to really take it to some of the top seeds in the second and third weekends.
Yeah, for sure. And, if Drake does win their playing game, win the first round game, and then has a shot in that next game, if they make it to the Sweet 16 and Loyola pulls off the upset against Illinois, which is a possibility because they're ridiculously underseeded, the committee is going to owe an apology to that conference because you got two teams who, I get it with Drake, with the injuries that they had and the way they finished the season, but you're going to be looking at an 11 seed and an 8 seed in the Sweet 16 and be like, maybe we were a little bit wrong on this one.
And this is me not knowing as much probably about the selection process as you might, but how much does this team has looked really good? This guy is injured, but maybe not out for the season, right? I think Gillespie is one thing. I think that's one scenario. But a team like Drake where they're getting guys back now, does that add to their seeding, or does that say at this point because you don't know how they're playing together?
I don't know for sure, and I don't know if anybody really knows for sure because the committee is a little bit of a black box. It seems like in the past when there's been an injury right at the last second, like in a conference tournament or something, they are just looking at the resume.
Yep.
And they don't care that guy's not there anymore. They're not going to dock the team because of that. Because think about a team that's on the bubble who's just played their way kind of into the tournament or off of the bubble, and then in the last second their best player gets hurt. Are they not going to make the tournament because of that? And you could have an argument for or against that. But the committee this year had some real head scratchers. I think Missouri is actually one of those. So I think a lot of people had them projected as closer to a 6 seed, and they're actually a 9. So that was one of the biggest deviations in terms of projections versus what they actually got. But it's kind of hard to complain with it. It just seems like they docked a team like Missouri and maybe like Drake a lot more for the way they ended their seasons poorly versus a team like Oklahoma State, where they didn't really reward them for finishing the season hotter than pretty much any team in the country. Although they did lose the championship to Texas. But I don't know. I don't think a lot of people know what the committee does. That's why you look at the bracketologists and their accuracy, and there's never anybody who gets it perfect because, it should be down to a science, but it's really not because, people have different opinions on what's most important. Like someone like me, I might be looking probably more heavily at some of the analytics. And even though a team might look bad or look better, the numbers are kind of I think give you what their average, their mean performance is, and maybe takes out some of the eye tests that we know. People on Twitter love to say that, it's the eye test that's being passed or not being passed. And some people's eyes are just really fucked up. So I don't know. They need to get some glasses. And I'm sure that happens on the committee too. So I don't know. I'm just happy that we have a bracket no matter what it is and that we're playing basketball this year. I'm super pumped to get these games started. I feel like I'm having to wait a whole extra week, even though it's just one more day to get these first round games started with them happening Friday this year. But I'm taking Friday off and Monday off, and I'm just going to hang out and I'm going to drink some beer and watch some basketball and enjoy myself. So
yeah, I'm with you. I will be, I'm taking all of next week off. I'm going to be chilling on the beach somewhere, watching it on my phone, maybe, with a pina colada in my hand. Not sure yet. But yeah, pretty excited for tournament. Glad we have a bracket. Speaking of which, last final plug at the end of the episode, hop over to my Twitter, which is @DrewTimmyStash. I'll have Carson shared on his Twitter as well. I made a bracket pool. Feel free to drop your brackets in there. Really no prize per se, but just like a fun little collection of any of our Gonzaga fans that want to throw a bunch of brackets that have Zags winning it in one pool and see who comes out on top. I know sometimes we get into, even out of the first weekend, I think we've had people who have come out with perfect brackets. There is no way in hell there will be a perfect bracket at the end of this first weekend. Not a chance. There's way too many variables with what's going on in the world to allow for anybody to be able to pick a perfect bracket this weekend. Because I think there's people that could predict that Kansas would win because Kansas is healthy, and it turns out they don't have enough guys and they're not even able to play, or the same thing happens to Virginia. Or you get somebody else that, has incidental contact and tests positive on Saturday morning. Like, there's so many variables. There's no way anybody's coming out with a perfect bracket.
Yeah, I also think that there's a lot of upset picks, maybe because of some of the COVID stuff that, we went through them and it was like, there's like 6 upset picks that I felt pretty confident picking at first. And I went back through my bracket and I was like, yeah, there's no way all of these happen. And it's going to be all over the place. There's going to be, that's what it is every year though. There's never a perfect bracket. So
I didn't mention this, but I as I was going back through my bracket, we had talked about our Elite 8 picks and our Final 4 picks and our champions. I actually did, and I think you mentioned it earlier when we were talking about USC. I did have USC slip into my Elite 8 on one of my brackets because of the fact that I had Kansas losing early. I had Iowa losing to Oregon. I know. As much as we've given people shit on Twitter about picking Oregon over Iowa, I did pick it in that game. And then I had USC beating Oregon in that following game. So I think there's plenty of potential for a team for 6 seeds to slip their way in, especially if 2 and 3 seeds are really dealing with COVID issues.
Yeah, and I think one of the big changes, I don't think I've made it yet, but because I'm a sucker for stats and patterns. And when I was listening back to the last podcast, and when Brian was saying that in the last 10 years, there has never been a Final Four that didn't have a 4 seed or higher. And I think because of that, I had Texas in as a 3 seed out of the, the Midwest bracket or whatever Michigan's in. And I think I'm going to have to change it to Florida State just because I don't think my brain will let me sleep if I don't follow a pattern. So, all right. Well, we've kind of rambled here for the last 10 minutes or so, but you can always talk about a lot of stuff when it comes to the tournament and everything. And we're just excited to be here, excited to be talking basketball and NCAA tournament again this year after a 1-year hiatus. So looking forward to it. Looking forward to some Zag basketball again after now a 1.5 week break. So, looking forward to it. Here comes the start to hopefully a great and memorable 6-game run for Gonzaga. And hopefully we can get the thing done this time. That's what we got. We'll post stuff on Twitter and Instagram over the next week and throughout the tournament, as always. So give us a follow at Zag Talk on there. If you haven't already, drop us a review, a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Other than that, go Zags.
Go Zags.